What's going on, everybody? It's ETAPRIME back here again. Today we're going to be taking a look at a brand new mini gaming PC from one of my favorite mini PC companies, Minisforum. Well, to tell you the truth, this is actually from their sister brand, Atom, and they released one recently. I did a review on it. But when it comes to this unit here, this is definitely packing much more gaming performance than most of the other mini PCs that we've seen on the market so far. This is also touted as the world's first AMD Advantage mini PC, which means paired up with a high refresh rate, low latency display, this offers unmatched gaming performance. And yeah, I could definitely see that in this form factor here because they actually packed a 16-core, 32-thread Ryzen CPU in here, paired up with an RX 7600 MXT with 8 gigs of VRAM, and that GPU will run it up to 130 watts in this mini PC. So needless to say, yeah, this is going to be able to play our favorite AAA games without an issue. This is known as the G7 PT, and inside of the box, obviously, we're going to get the mini PC itself. We also get an HDMI cable, a vertical stand, and a 300-watt power supply for this little unit. The stand uses a toolless design. It actually connects to the mini PC using a pretty strong magnet. Plus, we've got this cutout here to route our power cable. And once it's all put together, I think it looks pretty nice in the vertical orientation, but you could set this horizontally on the desk if you want to. And again, we've got just enough room in here to route our power cable through. And one of the big reasons I like using the stand is because we do have a little bit of RGB over here. And this is using the same kind of system that the older NUCs used. You can actually replace these little panels on the interior of the mini PC, adding your own logo and artwork if you wanted to. Overall, I think it's a really good looking mini PC. Tons of ventilation, and Minisforum has come up with a brand new cooling system specifically for this unit, which is unmatched by any other mini PC. We will take a look at temps. Very surprised by the temps on the CPU and GPU, and this thing really doesn't put out that much noise either. Taking a look at the overall I/O, up front here we've got a 3.5mm audio jack, full-size USB 3.2 Gen 2 port, and USB Type-C. This is actually USB 3.2. Kind of wish we had USB 4 here, but unfortunately they didn't add it with this unit. But around back, audio input and output, 2.5 gigabit Ethernet, 3 more full-size USB 3.2 ports, another USB-C 3.2, full-size HDMI, and we've also got a display port. So this will do 3 displays in total. We can utilize HDMI, DisplayPort, and USB Type-C. As for the overall specs, for the CPU, we've got the AMD Ryzen 9 7945HX, 16 cores, 32 threads, a base clock of 2.5, and a boost up to 5.4. Graphics are handled by the Radeon RX 7600 MXT with 8 gigs of GDDR6, and this GPU does run at 130 watts. This system supports up to 96 gigabytes of SODIMM DDR5 running at 5200 MHz. We've got one M.2 2280 PCIe 5.0 SSD slot and one PCIe 4.0 SSD slot, so in total we can add 2 drives to this unit. It's got Wi-Fi 7 and it's running Windows 11. Before we get into testing, I did want to give you a look at the internals, and like I mentioned, you can actually easily swap out the panels over here. It's a single panel now, but you could go with 2. I've seen people print these and cut them themselves, but there are companies out there that'll print very similar items, so you can actually just slot your own design right down in there. Moving over to the other side, we can easily pop off this panel, but to get down in here, it is a bit of work. There's 8 extra screws. That way we can reach the M.2 slots and the RAM. So we'll need to remove these, and then we can actually pull the whole unit out. So it is a bit of a job. I mean, it's not the worst that I've seen, but the way they've got everything set up in here is super nice. We've got an M.2 cooler built in with a fan, dual channel SODIMM up to 96 gigs, and this one here I believe has 32 gigs with a 1 terabyte drive installed. Another free M.2 slot right under that cooling system. And yeah, I mean, it's actually put together really nicely. The new heatsink design that they used for this is definitely custom specifically for this unit here, but it's absolutely massive. So what we're going to be able to do here is keep the TDP up on that CPU and the TGP up on the GPU so we can get the maximum performance out of this thing without it thermal throttling, and it doesn't sound like a rocket ship. First things first, wanted to give you a look at the BIOS. We've got the Minisforum Visual BIOS. Heading into setup, basically everything here is unlocked. We can even mess around with the fan curve if we want to, but the way they've got it set up is really nice already. CPU configuration, AMD CBS, SMU common options. System configuration is at auto, and it only goes up to 75 in the BIOS. Their auto preset is much higher. We'll take a look at all of that in a second. You can adjust the smart shift control. So yeah, I mean, if you did want to tweak this thing, you definitely could. Hardware monitor. Yeah, CPU fan can be fully configured directly from here. So there's a lot that we can do with this thing, but I want to take a look at it in its stock form factor with the stock settings here. So we're just going to go ahead and exit and get into Windows. All right, so here it is. And yeah, I mean, this thing is actually putting down some really amazing performance. We've got that Ryzen 9 7945HX with the built-in Radeon graphics. It's 16 cores, 32 threads, and I'll show you the TDP in a second. I think they got this set up perfectly. 32 gigs of 5200 megahertz RAM. We've still got access to the Radeon 610M iGPU, but that's not going to be doing much because we've got the AMD Radeon RX 7600M XT. 8 gigs of VRAM. Now, I want to give you a look at the TDP here. So what I've got is core temp up and running right here. Is going to give our power from that CPU. From CPU Z, we'll just run a stress test. This is going to max out all 16 cores and 32 threads. We've got quite a high boost. I see it go to around 120, 130, and then dip on down to 85. So our sustained TDP on this unit is 85, and if you take a look at this temperature over here, it really doesn't fluctuate too much. While running Cinebench R23, we hit a maximum CPU temperature of 77 degrees Celsius. Now I will admit that the GPU isn't running at the same time, and it's kind of a combined heatsink at least up top. They've got their own separate heat pipes. So with the GPU pumping out and the CPU at the same time, we might see higher temps, but this is looking pretty decent. And that's a 10-minute test that stresses all of these cores out. The unit itself does have that dual fan design, but it's not that loud. It's pushing a little bit of air right now, but you can barely hear the unit. Another thing I wanted to show you was the TGP on this GPU. So we've got that RX 7600 MXT, and we've got a TGP on that of 130 watts. So it's not a cut down version. And like I mentioned, with that turbo button up front, it really doesn't affect the TGP on the GPU itself. It's more for the CPU. So with it off, we've got a 65 watt TDP. With it on, we've got that 85 sustained. Next thing I wanted to take a look at were some benchmarks. And first up, we've got Cinebench R23. I've also got the temperature up on screen right now. And if you take a look at the max temperature, we did hit 77 degrees Celsius, but that's it. That's the highest temp I saw out of this CPU. And again, these fans are not blasting out like a laptop would. This is a really nice cooling system. The next benchmark we have here is Geekbench 6, single core 2786, multi 16386. Checking out some GPU benchmarks with 3D Mark Firstrike 28630. And the final one I ran here was Time Spy with an 11166. I mean, this thing is definitely getting up there. And the Radeon RX 7600 MXT is not really touted as a 1440p gaming card, but I do believe that 1440p high or 1080 Ultra is where this thing stands. Now it's time to check out some gaming on this thing, and first up we've got Cyberpunk 2077 1440p Ultra with FSR set to balance. Again, I do think that, at 1440p we can run some of these games at Ultra, but for the most part, high settings is where it's at with a little bit of FSR. 1080 Ultra with no FSR will work with most of the AAA games out there right now, but going up with that resolution, taking FSR to balance, it still looks amazing. 1440p, very high. FSR is set to balanced, and we're also using frame gen. So recently, Nixxes added frame gen and FSR 3.1 to most of their PC ports that they have on the market right now. This is one of them, definitely one of my favorite games right now also. And at very high with frame gen on, we're seeing averages in the high 80s with this game at 1440p. Helldivers 2 is another one I wanted to test here. We're at 1440, high settings, FSR set to balance. I'm seeing an average of around 73 FPS, and I thought I'd see a little more out of this given that we're only at high and not, max settings at ultra with this game. I know we're using FSR, but it's a little odd because in the past I have seen better performance out of this same card and this game. Elden Ring works absolutely amazing on this little system. We're at 1440 maximum settings. I didn't have to adjust anything. We're just running at a constant 60. And I figured this game would. It looks great at 1440p. Really haven't noticed any issues whatsoever with this 7600 MXT and this game. So yeah, just bet that you can definitely play this maxed out at 1440. Shadow of the Tomb Raider using the built-in benchmark. We're at very high settings, 1440p, using no scaling. So we do have the option to use Fidelity CAS here, but I didn't need it. And by the end, we had an average of 86 FPS. I also ran the built-in benchmark for Red Dead 2, and this one was pretty impressive. I've actually been testing this quite a bit on newer cards, and seeing some great performance out of most of the stuff on the market. Ultra settings 1440, minimum of 44, maximum of 151, and an average of 115. Call of Duty Modern Warfare 3 at 1440, ultra settings, FSR set to balanced, and using frame gen from within the game settings. I personally like using it with all of these AMD setups. We had an average of 161 and a minimum of 77. And finally, we've got Horizon Forbidden West. This has been a game that has just given me issues on everything that I've tested it with. Right now, we are at 1440, medium settings. FSR had to go to performance, and I am using frame gen. And I mean, we're right there on the edge of dropping under 60. Not sure really what it is about this game here, but on all of the AMD cards that I usually test this with, I'm not seeing, the best performance that I was really hoping for. Still, it is playable like this. I would suggest with this 7600 MXT, just going down to 1080 with it. And the final thing I wanted to take a look at here was total system power consumption from the wall and CPU and GPU temps. When it comes to power consumption, I've got this plugged into a kilowatt meter, and at idle, it's pulling a total of 23 watts from the wall. Average gaming, around 214 watts, and the maximum, 276 watts. Remember, this comes with a 300 watt power supply, so we're under that limit there. Average gaming CPU temps around 78 degrees Celsius. Maximum temp I saw there was actually 86. And for the GPU, average 64, maximum 69. So again, when that GPU is also adding heat to the heatsink array we've got here, it does heat that CPU up a bit, but I never hit thermal throttle with it. And this thing did stay pretty quiet the whole time. So far, pretty impressed with the performance I'm seeing out of this mini PC. Now, of course, there are a few other things I'd like to test, like, of course, running Linux on this machine. I think it would handle something like Bazite really well, especially given that we've got a full AMD system here. But this is actually up for pre-order right now over on Minisforum's website. If you're interested in learning a little more, I will leave some links down below. And keep an eye out on the channel because, yeah, running Linux on this I think would be pretty awesome, and I really want to get a video like that out of the way. But that's going to wrap it up for our first look video at the Atoman G7 PT. If you've got any questions, let me know in the comments. And like always, thanks for watching.